Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a fascinating discussion. And in fact, the chairman mentioned a fiscal commission. I think this would be exactly what a fiscal commission should be doing, is trying to come up with a shared set of facts and beliefs that we all can agree upon. Because there are things mentioned here today that I think probably most of us agree. You know, our birth rate and our demographics will not work for a growing economy going forward. We're going to have to increase the workforce participation rate and or increase immigration because we're going to need the workers to pay into the system. So I completely agree with that. Mr. Linden, you mentioned that one of the important components of changing the debt-to-equity ratio is growing the economy. And so, you know, we've got to, I completely agree, we've got to figure out the right policies to grow the economy. So this is exactly the kind of discussion that we should be having. I was surprised, Mr. Linden, that your perception of the debt is different than many that we hear. And I'd like to just explore that a little, because this is sort of a fundamental fact base, if you will, or a problem that we have to agree on. My perception is the debt is projected to grow. The debt to GDP is going to grow, according to CBO, to almost 200% in the next 30, 50 years. 172%, I think, in the next 30 years. Your quote, and I've read your testimony as well, but you said here you think there's you think the evidence of high debt being a problem is mixed. So are you not concerned? I mean, as far as we can see, revenues are on a certain line, and even if we make changes to revenue, and then spending is another one, so the gap's going to continue to increase. Like, is that not, you don't think that's a legitimate concern?
Oh, I do think it's a legitimate concern. I think risks.
At what level?
Well, that's the question, right? Risks are different than certainties. And if you had asked people 10 years ago, they would have said 90% of GDP, that's the threshold. If we're there, then things fall apart. And that turned out to not be true. And if you'd asked people before that, they would have given you a different number. And I think the point that I really want to make is we should, instead of saying we are definitely headed for a calamity and therefore we're willing to do anything we can to avoid that calamity, we should take the risks seriously, look at what the evidence actually says. Does higher debt inevitably lead to higher interest rates? The answer to that question is no, by our historical experience. Could it lead to higher interest rates? Yes, and that's why we need to be thoughtful about these.
Are you concerned about a possible sovereign debt crisis at some point? And what I'm talking about is where people buying the treasuries no longer believe that the U.S. has the ability to repay, and so they stop buying treasuries. I mean, that would be, first of all, you agree that would be a calamity.
That would be very bad.
Yeah. Are you concerned
I think the way that we want to reduce the risk of something like that happen, to be clear, no evidence that we're on the cusp of that or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's a risk, and we should take risks seriously. And like we do in any other area of our life, we should measure those risks based on how likely they are, how big they are.
I wish we had more time, and I'd love to give the two of you a chance. And what I'm looking for, and I can point me in the right direction. You know, we have, I don't know, you all read Ray Dalio's book, I don't know, but like there are plenty of examples of countries and empires that have risen and fallen. And my perception, at least, is often it's because of their fiscal policies. You know, you had the British Empire for centuries, you had the Dutch Empire, and they're gone. I'm concerned this could happen to America. And so what have any of you looked at history and tried to extrapolate like where we are and where we're headed if we don't change course? I mean, Mr. Linden, you obviously aren't as concerned, but I'd be interested in hearing from the two of you as well.
So, Congressman, my read of the literature on the 90% figure is that countries have not had financial crises, debt crises below 90% of GDP, debt to GDP ratios, that they have all occurred above 90. Now, it does not mean that once you hit 90, you hit a debt crisis. It just says that's where they happen. Japan's been above 200% for a while, but Japan has a much higher savings rate. Now, the US has the world's reserve currency, which means that our threshold is going to be higher. The challenge that we have is that we don't know where the threshold is, and it will be a moment, it'll be a crisis of confidence moment, and you don't know what's going to spark that. I testified a couple of months ago with a former Treasury colleague who now runs the Penn Wharton budget model. And his testimony was that we don't know when, but 20 years from now, there will be no interest rate that will clear the Treasury bond market. At the best, 20 years from now. I don't want to find out what that looks like, and that means we need to get our fiscal house in order today.
If I can just add one point, one of the risks is that we might end up in a scenario where we have what's so-called fiscal dominance, where the Federal Reserve no longer makes policy based on containing inflation, but on the basis of supporting the Treasury in continuing to finance government spending should it become difficult to borrow from bond markets. And there what you're looking at is we had a fairly recent experience with that, very high rates of inflation, recurring bouts of inflation, which create uncertainty in the market and cause a lot of harm and pain for exactly the types of populations that can bear that risk the least, which is why I think that it's very encouraging that Congress is advancing the idea of a fiscal commission to have those discussions before a fiscal crisis or another unexpected calamity forces legislators' hands.
I'm apparently out of time, but thank you. Maybe we aren't as far apart as initially we would, it sounded, but. Yeah, I know, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Have at it.
Mr. Smucker, you're out of time.